When I was in Tehran, I tortured a young man. Couldn't have been older than 12. I said, tell me everything you f***ing know or I'm gonna blow your head off. I had to shoot him right in the mouth.
DECKER is a hilarious spy parody in its own right. The inept editing, the terrible acting.
Irony is, I am an agent of CIA.
The childish dialogue.
You cured me of the mishmash, my mind wipe.
The political posturing.
I discovered that global warming is nothing but a hoax.
The amateur hour special effects. But taking into account its surrounding context, it's incredible how much legwork is done to really earn the show's so bad it's funny approach. From a macro perspective, the show is surprisingly complex and layered. In case you didn't know, what makes DECKER unique is that it's a show written by and starring fictional characters from another show, On Cinema at the Cinema, on which the series' entire production saga is discussed and documented. There are plenty of examples of shows within shows, but that doesn't quite encompass what DECKER is, a separate show born from and contingent upon another. Viewers would watch these episodes as they aired in tandem, all the while checking in with the characters that created them week to week and back again. Almost every fiber of DECKER takes on a whole new meaning when you account for the events of On Cinema. It's endlessly satisfying how it all cleverly connects and builds together as the two shows' narratives become more and more intertwined. But while you could reasonably watch all of DECKER in a weekend and still have time left over to organize your cans and build a birdhouse with your son, keeping up with the surrounding context can be a whole lot more time-consuming and confusing.
I certainly don't have time for this.
So the goal for this video is to fill in those gaps, and conversely, by the distribute transaxive property, how the release of the show shaped the progression of On Cinema. For this one, I'm going to focus solely on the first season, but let me know if you'd like to see the rest of the series covered in this way as well. Before DECKER was announced, there was only On Cinema.
This is a movie show, or it's a web show about which I review movies and have with a guest who also reviews the movies.
This was Tim Heidecker and Gregg Turkington's largely self-contained comedic movie review web show. Over the years, the show expanded into a vast ARG-style universe of content across several mediums. But DECKER was the first major departure from this web series. Before its reveal, the franchise consisted solely of a slate of podcast episodes, almost 40 episodes of the web show, and one live special. Throughout all of this, Gregg remained stubbornly attached to his particular objectives in film criticism, while Tim's ambitions grew quickly beyond the confines of reviewing movies, and his interest in the concept faded quickly. So much so that near the end of the show's 4th season, a natural step in the evolution of a deeply narcissistic man tired of spending his time watching and talking about other people's movies was fulfilled.
I was making On Cinema as a host of On Cinema, my show where we review movies, and the thought occurred to me, maybe I can do as good a job, if not better, making movies and TV shows and things like this.
Tim revealed out of the blue that he was making his own movie, that he had been financing it himself and had inexplicably been working on it every weekend for 6 months. This announcement was accompanied by an embarrassingly terrible clip.
You will see now an exclusive scene from DECKER.
Then I want you to assassinate every f***ing Iranian that you see.
Now that's the first goddamn thing you've ever said that made one piece of fucking sense. You still don't get it, do you? Luck is for pussies like you. All I need is this gun.
The title card at the end of this clip made the claim that the movie would be coming soon to theaters worldwide, despite the fact that none of the actual film had been shot yet.
I'll be reshooting them when we get the real budget, but these are theoretical scenes that we're going to be presenting to investors. I'm pretty happy with it.
Tim has a strong tendency to put the cart before the horse in everything he does, and this is a perfect example. A key element of his character is that he almost entirely lacks self-awareness. He stubbornly believes himself to be capable of almost anything, and no amount of abject failure seems to deter him. His half-baked idea didn't have any sort of production entity behind it, so he put his own money into filming scenes for it and claimed right from the jump that it was bound for a worldwide theater release, despite his work's obvious lack of quality. His delusions of grandeur then started to snowball incredibly quickly. Just 5 days later, Tim presented a segment depicting himself in the future as a successful actor winning an Oscar. In his speech, he ranted in disdain against movie critics.
All the movie critics out there, I used to do this. I used to be a movie critic. You guys can go sit in your little corner and think you're God and tell everybody what they should see and what they shouldn't see. But the trick is, this is what matters, is winning gold and becoming a successful actor and going on to be in a lot of movies and starring in them as well.
The message was clear. He was ready to leave his current status behind and be recognized for his true talents, and his movie was the ticket.
DECKER, probably going to be Academy Awards.
The problem is, those talents are, let's say, questionable, and he was unwilling to take his time, pay his dues, or hone his filmmaking skills to get there. His preferred method, as always, was to throw money at this idea and rush through it as quickly as possible.
I want to show you guys a brand new scene from DECKER that we shot this weekend.
This broadcast took place on a Monday, meaning the clip he showed was likely finished less than 24 hours ago.
One of your Secret Service agents is a spy, and he's here to assassinate you. First thing I need is every file on all your Secret Service agents.
As with a lot of the humor in Decker, the clip is funny somewhat simply because of how terrible it is. So bad it's funny. But the poor quality isn't just random mistake or unexplained ineptitude. It is thoroughly contextualized and justified, knowing the desires behind it, the rushed production, etc. As Tim's ambitious fantasies were growing exponentially, his lack of talent and experience of course remained static. This is a constant struggle central to the universe of On Cinema. As Tim's ambitions and prolificacy win out over his ineptitude, what's left is a constant string of hyped up expensive failures. Decker is a perfect example of just that, and a few months later, the first episode of Decker, now a mini-series, was set to come out online. Tim hyped up its release quite a bit.
Terrorism, action, adventure, CIA. It stars me, written, directed, and starring by me, Tim Heidecker.
Promising objective greatness, even tweeting out fake reviews claiming Decker to be better than Game of Thrones. I mean, art is subjective, sure, but it's a tough comparison to justify any way you spin it. The Game of Thrones pilot was an hour and 2 minutes long. The first thing you may notice about the pilot of Decker is that it's considerably shorter, at a brisk 3 minutes and 14 seconds. The episode begins with a location card suggesting the episode is taking place in Afghanistan. But of course, it's so clearly filmed in Southern California, where Tim lives and has been the whole time while filming On Cinema.
Believe it or not, Afghanistan can be very beautiful this time of year.
While awkwardly running and crawling and spinning around with a gun in his hand and shooting at nothing, the Decker character explains in voiceover that he's going to meet a Taliban double agent working as an informant for the CIA.
I'm running to meet him now.
From the location scouting down to the casting, it's clear that convenience was a big factor in decision making throughout this production, even at the expense of quality. For example, the actor cast to play the Taliban informant is revealed to be Mark Porch. Tim met Mark just a few months prior, during the same live show as Tim's Oscar fantasy and Decker clip. Mark is a painfully untalented impressionist that was hired for that live show to impersonate celebrities such as W.C. Fields and Charlie Chaplin.
Ladies and gentlemen, friends and foes, I'm W.C. Fields.
Tim and Mark did not get along at all during the Oscar special, as Tim was incredibly unhappy with his performance, to the point of all-out rage and abuse.
Get him the out of here!
Despite this, we now see that Tim has hired Mark again for his own show. Mark's signature bad habits as a performer, habits Tim is objected to, are not only replicated but are left in the final cut. In nearly every one of his impressions, Mark will begin by wildly overacting and doing some ridiculous accent.
One of our best films was The Captain That Hated the Sea. Don't come over here, Mo, and stay away from me, Curly. I don't want you guys hitting me.
And then get discouraged or self-conscious and quickly retract into his normal speaking voice.
I died in 1975, had a long marriage.
It's a great example of the kind of character details in history that can take a funny moment on Decker and elevate it so much. Knowing Mark to historically have a hard time staying in character for even short amounts of time contextualizes the mistake when he completely drops character and reverts to plain American English.
My pleasure, Decker.
The same goes for Jack Decker calling Abdul two different names.
Abdul, can't sneak up on a CIA agent like that. Abdullah, thank you very much for your help securing me this very important secret documents.
Throughout On Cinema, a major recurring joke is Tim's dyslexia, or his inability to pronounce names correctly.
Directed by David Twohy. T-W-O-H-Y. What the hell? How do you pronounce that? Twohy. Twohy. David Twohy. Gregg Turkington, sorry.
Part of his job as host of the show is to read off actor names every week, a task that time and time again proves challenging for him.
Oliva Munn. It's just Munn. Okay. Oliva Munn. I can't keep doing these names.
Without a proper script supervisor to check for continuity, and a detrimentally lenient editing style, these character details from On Cinema bleed into Decker. As shown in this very first conversation with Abdul, Jack Decker will constantly pronounce the same names in different ways, even his own from time to time. After Abdul explains the terrorist plans to destroy America are locked in a briefcase that's rigged to blow, we get our first example of the kind of world-class special effects work we have come to expect from this series. Every choice made in Decker reflects Tim's interests and current circumstances. He watches movies for a living, loving some like Jack Reacher and Escape Plan and hating others like James Bond. Because he's not overly imaginative, when making his own show, he essentially just tries to copy elements that he likes from the movies he's seen. This goes all the way down to his very character. It comes from Tim's character trying to copy what he thinks are cool action heroes. He's trying to be badass, suave, and serious, but failing miserably. The squinting, the outfit, the very serious poses. He takes all of these elements that he's seen from the likes of De Niro and Bruce Willis and Steven Seagal and just melts them down into one terribly hacky performance. It's like seeing a child cosplaying as his favorite action stars if we'd been watching that child discuss their movies for several years. Knowing Tim's opinions on movies, what he likes and what he doesn't, entirely changes what's funny about the performance.
Shit. Taliban has started growing poppy seed again, which is the worst because that's for heroin. Gotta destroy all this heroin.
we're now laughing at Tim specifically for thinking these character choices would be cool and piecing together why they were made.
Afghanistan, Taliban,
Intelligence?
terrorists.
In episode 2, Jack Decker returns to the White House to regroup with the president, Jason Davidson. Here's another example of Tim simply casting the people immediately around him. The president is played by Joe Estevez, brother of Martin Sheen. Back in season 2 of On Cinema, Joe was interviewed as a part of a new segment.
I have a lot of unopened DVDs and even DVDs.
And subsequently made a few more appearances on the show. Joe is a good-natured, supportive, and friendly person. He's an optimist that sees the good in everyone and everything, to the extent that he often finds himself happily along for the ride in projects or schemes that he would be better off without. Maybe an in-universe explanation for why his real-world IMDb credits list is like 47,000 pages long. Now, this isn't confirmed at all by any in-universe explanation, but my theory is that the idea for the show first formed around the president character being played by Joe Estevez. Tim's announcement that he'd been making his own movie for the past 6 months came 7 months after Joe's first in-studio appearance, suggesting the idea was born around then. Joe's brother is perhaps best known for playing Jed Bartlett, the president on the West Wing. Inspired by Joe's resemblance to his brother, I believe his playing the president was born of Tim's lack of imagination and a desire to push his political views. It was just 2 weeks after Joe's very first appearance on the show that Tim ran his first 60-second soapbox segment.
But it's a fact that when you look at history, it is better to not tax so much and have not as much regulations.
It may be a stretch to suggest Joe reminding him of the Democratic president on the West Wing spurred this, but certainly from then on, Tim began to incorporate his personal politics into the show more and more often, becoming a more central aspect of his character.
Healthcare is a privilege, it's not a right, and anybody that thinks differently doesn't know what they're talking about.
I think I'd be a terrific guest on one of those political shows.
Combine Tim's growing interest in politics and his desire to make his own movie, Joe Estevez as the president, just like his brother, was a no-brainer.
The only reason you like football is for all the gridlock.
He would serve as the foil to Tim's political views, almost a stand-in, allowing Tim to say what he would want to say to Martin Sheen's character on the West Wing.
I wish you understood how to support the troops.
Therefore, Tim's character would need to be one with direct access to the president and the authority to speak freely, as well as an all-around badass hero type akin to Jack Reacher to complete the fantasy. Boom, Jack Decker. From that very first clip, the dynamic between Davidson and Decker was set. Davidson, the spineless Democratic president,
I should just resign and make you president.
And Decker, the conservative hero of America that challenges him every step of the way and is always right.
You failed to use the constitutional authority guaranteed to you by our founding fathers to use force to protect the homeland from these savages. Your administration is a disgrace.
Episode 2 is a great example of this, as Decker pushes past protesters
Get out of my way, I don't have time for this. Why don't you guys get a job?
to reach Davidson's office to chastise him and even literally point a gun at his head. Tim's intentions in this area were quite clear, as throughout the whole first season's run, he was tweeting at various politicians about the show. Tim's politics are central to this character, and just about every storyline on the show, in a way On Cinema just doesn't allow for. Maybe my favorite gag in all of Decker happens in the 3rd episode, and this one really requires some backstory. The other half of the dynamic duo of On Cinema is Gregg Turkington. Gregg is the resident film expert on the show, and he's a purist when it comes to the show's focus, movies. Gregg is reliably unsupportive anytime Tim deviates from this focus. Tim announcing he was making his own movie was no exception, and Gregg took issue with the idea right away.
It's not a real movie. It's not going to be a real movie. You don't seem to understand how movies are made.
Every step of the way, Gregg would disparage Tim's efforts and cast his doubts.
Joe, what's it like shooting scenes for a movie that you know will never be completed or will never air?
He even went so far as to intentionally sabotage potential casting opportunities.
Tim's a good guy, and I love working with him. If he contacts you about a movie called DECKER, do not return the call. The movie is not really a real movie, and it's not really worth your time.
As the first episode was airing, Gregg was tweeting in protest, saying things like, "People should stick to things they're good at. A web series is nothing compared to a full-length movie, and I'm proud of what we've accomplished with On Cinema. No need for side projects." After episodes 1 and 2, his sentiments remained the same.
I didn't say anything nice about it.
But episode 3 would be a shock to him. We pick back up with Decker holding a gun to the president's head, demanding access to his top code-breaking agent.
Call CIA and get me your best code breaker. You want your brain splattered on the desk, or are you going to call that CIA guy?
The bomb briefcase he was given in Afghanistan is locked with a 3-digit analog combination lock, so naturally the solution would be to FaceTime a codebreaker with an inexplicable magic ability to conjure combinations over the phone.
Give me Special Agent Kington.
To Gregg's surprise, that CIA codebreaker was played by Gregg. You see, rather than asking Gregg to be in his movie, Tim had tricked him into saying lines that he could cut into the show without his knowledge.
Quick audio test, just say, hey guys.
Hey guys.
Special Agent Kington, Special Agent CIA.
Hey guys.
One of Gregg's main passions is collecting and cataloging VHS tapes. He's so obsessed with his collection that he came up with his own coding system that he uses to organize them.
This is my new coding system, internal coding for my collection. T is for the title, 2 weeks notice. 5 is my rating, 5 bags of popcorn. 0 is the decade that the movie was released. L is the first letter of the director's last name. 35 is the shelf number where I keep the tape, and 48 is the tape number.
The only thing he loves more than his tapes and his coding system is talking about it all. Tim used this to extract lines about codes from Gregg.
So I'm trying to figure out a way to organize my video collection. Is this something that you feel comfortable giving me advice on?
Yeah, when it comes to movies, I'm the master of codes.
Can you get in or not?
I think I can do it because I'm the master of codes.
On the main show, a few weeks before this episode of DECKER aired, Tim presented an interview segment called On Cinema on Guests.
When I talk to you, don't look at me, look into the camera. I'm just going to ask you some questions about your relationship with movies. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, that's my area of expertise.
Can you do the job or not?
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, that's my area of expertise.
She asked Gregg to wear a suit, sit in front of a green screen, and talk about his codes.
So would you be able to tell me what code this movie would get?
Sure, it's worth a shot.
Should I turn it to the right?
Sure, it's worth a shot.
You motherfucker, give me the code!
This seemed odd to anyone watching, including Gregg himself at the time,
I don't understand why you bought me a suit.
but his burning desire to talk VHS coding was too great to question it further.
So, the way to do these codes.
As we later found out, Tim's ulterior motive was to frame this interview as a conversation with a CIA codebreaker on DECKER.
We need you to crack this 3-digit code as soon as possible. Otherwise, the whole country is going to be in problems.
Okay, sure.
What are the numbers?
5.
I've accessed 5.
This is one of the best examples of how the two shows brilliantly intersect. A moment from On Cinema sees its huge payoff weeks later on DECKER, which in turn hilariously affects the next episode of On Cinema in its wake. After the episode aired and Gregg saw that he had been tricked into appearing on DECKER, a massive argument broke out between him and Tim.
I didn't agree to be part of DECKER, and I wouldn't have agreed to it. Suddenly I'm some weirdo character in DECKER.
Everything you do is mine.
Do you have cameras in the toilets, too?
No.
I will go to bed sleeping every night knowing I did the right thing for this show. I did the right thing for DECKER. I did the right thing for me.
With examples like this, you can imagine how fun it was to follow the narrative across these two shows. Jumping ahead briefly, this goes even farther in one of my absolute favorite little details. Tim actually ironically cuts a clip from this very argument into the final episode of the show.
You know what, I don't really want to say anything about it because anything I say might end up in an episode of DECKER. I really love DECKER.
Episode 4 sees Jack Decker now aware of the terrorists' plan.
They want to blow up Central Park with a nuclear bomb. Today.
Racing against the clock to stop it. There are so many hilarious details in this one. Central Park obviously being a random park in Los Angeles, intercut with stock images like one of my videos. The reveal that Abdul for some reason gave Decker real intel to thwart his own evil plan. And this patriotic masterpiece. But in terms of the surrounding context, the most noteworthy part is the iconic 84-second motorcycle riding montage. See, during this time, there was a lot going on in Tim's life, and Decker was not the only manifestation of his midlife crisis. Within the past year, Tim had divorced his wife, suffered severe health problems, and had just recently discovered that his ex was pregnant with his child, who he was refusing to take responsibility for. His reaction to all of this was to buy a motorcycle and move to Jackson Hole. Reminds me of Wild Hogs, Tim Allen. The whole idea of motorcycles and the open road represented freedom to him. Freedom in his own life and from his responsibilities. A feeling that he conflated with patriotism and his tenuous grasp on the traditionally conservative notion of political liberty that his character so devoutly subscribes to.
Connecting in with some of the rights that I have as a patriot. And I actually did a Patriot ride from Jackson Hole to LA.
Motorcycles and the lifestyle of a biker became a passionate obsession of his, to the point that simultaneous to the production of DECKER, he was developing a coffee table book about motorcycles called Hog Shots. This indulgently long motorcycle sequence in which Decker does a Patriot ride from DC to New York just in time to stop the bombing instead of taking one of the helicopters or planes at his disposal is Tim escaping into his fantasies. Tim on Cinema is incredibly scattered and impatient. He's always searching for the next venture, his next identity, and he quickly loses interest or moves on to new things. His current obsession with motorcycles and the freedom that it represents to him crossing over to his filmmaking delusions highlights the interconnectivity of it all. In writing his scripts, he just cannot think beyond his exact current interests, immortalizing his very temporary obsessions in his work.
I took out a very large small business loan to publish Hog Shots, which does not happen. I do not recommend motorcycles. People should drive cars, a lot safer, and stick with cars. You don't need to be on a motorcycle.
Having stopped the bombing of Central Park, Decker's adventure is complete in the final episode. After a few more digs at President Davidson and a speech about how great he is, the first season wraps up with Jack Decker flying off to Hawaii for a vacation. This is setting up the sequel, demonstrating Tim's confidence in this IP. This confidence had nothing to do with the quality or the reception of these Decker episodes. From the very beginning, Tim was proud of the idea and convinced that he would be lauded as a master filmmaker by his peers, constantly reminding us that he wrote and directed this, and predicting its success. In the aftermath of the first season, Tim was incredibly proud and constantly bragging about his role in it, becoming emotional about its release.
I shouldn't even get into this because I'm going to start crying.
It didn't matter how it turned out or what anyone said about it.
I would have
Greg,
probably
shut up for a
a
sec.
few less motorcycle riding shots.
Tim would have treated it as a masterpiece and a huge hit either way.
And it turned into a huge hit.
Fast-tracking his sequel plans. Tim had become so fixated on his vision from the beginning that even though it didn't turn out well, he convinced himself otherwise. His initial plan was to make a feature film, and what he ended up making was a 5-episode miniseries with average 4-minute episodes. Despite this being a failure to do what he set out to do, what he promised to the audience, Tim was delusional about the whole thing. He would continue to refer to it as a movie.
Seeing Decker hit the silver screen.
His initial vision that he still couldn't let go of. He didn't really care about making something good. He just wanted the praise and the accolades that would come along with being a hit filmmaker. When it didn't pan out that way, he resorted to simply arguing that it was a movie, and even staging a whole awards show in order to give himself awards for his work on it.
The poppy goes to Tim Heidecker.
It wasn't only Tim. Even Greg, who to recap, hated the idea from the beginning, undermining it at every turn, and was furious upon finding out that he was tricked into being in it, got swept up in playing movie star, suddenly coming around to fully support the show. Tim put out a tweet requesting people go praise Greg's performance to make him feel better, and this little bit of attention was enough for him to do a complete 180, even retroactively playing up his involvement.
It was so fun to do. It was such a fun
It was
project.
fun, definitely.
You know,
Kington is the master of codes. He cracks these codes that no one else can crack, and that's really what makes the series come alive. Without Kington, you'd have no Decker series.
As I mentioned regarding Greg's initial reaction to the Agent Kington coding scene, the relationship between Decker and On Cinema is not one-sided. For example, the release of this first season led to a number of major events in the narrative of On Cinema. In this period directly following, tensions were high between Gregg and Tim, due partially to major arguments about whether Gregg would be allowed to reprise his role in Decker Season 2.
Yeah, but
Star
something
Wars
like-
movies where they didn't have Mark Hamill, you know, the Phantom Menace, and people are just thinking to
I wouldn't
themselves,
go
why
ahead
didn't
and
they just
compare
make
yourself to Mark Hamill, okay? You were a bit player.
Just about 6 months later, it's revealed that Gregg's performance in Decker led to Yes Man director Peyton Reed casting Gregg for a small role in Marvel's Ant-Man. Tim had already been big-leaguing Peyton Reed, acting like Decker was far better and more important than anything he's made.
I'd seen this Yes Man movie once on TBS, but
there's
I mean, it's not.
But the news of this casting sent him into a rage. Shortly after, Tim began the desperate, jealous search for a movie role to combat Gregg's, tweeting at directors like Steven Spielberg, asking for parts, and bragging to Peyton Reed after securing one in Josh Trank's Fantastic Four remake. The amazing thing is, this wasn't just a storyline on the show. Tim and Gregg actually appeared in these movies in the real world. The argument about which movie was better and whether or not Tim had to pay his director for a vanity role,
I completely understand why you would want to be involved with it, why you would pay the $15,000 to get that cameo in the movie.
We're not.
became a massive and hilarious running joke in this universe, still being referenced to this day. The reason I mention this is not only that this season of Decker led to one of my favorite long-running through lines on Cinema, but also it shows how creatively this show within a show concept is used here. There are 3 layers of world building inception here: the real world, the On Cinema world, and the Decker world. These characters, beginning on a fictional web series in which they reviewed real world movies, made a fake movie that aired as a real TV show. Their performances in which led to their characters being cast in real world movies, which is then used as a plot point on that original fictional web series. God, I love this show. The ways the following seasons of Decker fit into this larger comedy universe only become more and more significant from here as the show evolves into a more fully realized series. But that's all from me for now. Thanks for watching.